The custom-made desk in Damon Castellano's private suite was imported from Milan and required 6 men to install it. Imani Banks didn't know that when her trembling legs finally gave out and she sank into the leather chair behind it at 2:33 a.m. She'd been on her feet for 14 hours. Hospital shift. Diner shift. Now this, Gold Coast luxury offices that paid $3 more per hour than anywhere else in Chicago. Her vision blurred as she set down the wood polish. The chair was so soft. Softer than her mattress at home. Softer than anything she'd ever touched. Just 2 minutes, she told herself, her braids falling across her face as her eyes closed. Nobody's here this late. Just long enough to stop shaking. She miscalculated. At 3:15 a.m., the private elevator to the executive floor opened with a pneumatic hiss Imani never heard. Damon Castellano stepped into the darkened hallway, his Italian leather shoes soundless on marble floors. He carried a briefcase in one gloved hand, always gloved, even alone, and moved through his domain like a man inspecting a sterile laboratory. He reached his office door, pushed it open, and froze. There was a person in his chair, behind his desk, feet propped up on the glass surface he had sanitized twice daily. A purple mop leaning against his chair. Cleaning supplies scattered across his floor like evidence of chaos he couldn't control. The muscles in Damon's jaw turned to stone. His breathing stopped entirely for 3 seconds, he counted, before his head of security appeared beside him. "Sir." Marcus kept his voice low, recognizing the warning signs. "I'll have her removed and terminated immediately." "No." Marcus blinked. "Sir, don't touch her." Damon's voice was surgical room quiet, which everyone who worked for him knew was infinitely more dangerous than shouting. "Don't wake her. Don't go near her." The security chief hesitated. Everyone knew about Damon Castellano's contamination protocols. The man sanitized door handles before touching them. He'd had an entire boardroom fumigated because someone sneezed during a presentation. He required laminated health certificates from anyone entering his personal spaces. And now he wanted to leave this stranger unconscious in his private office? "What would you like me to do?" Marcus asked carefully. Damon's eyes never left Imani's sleeping form as he pulled out his phone, encased in antimicrobial covering, naturally. His thumb moved across the screen with practiced precision. "Get me the owner of Premium Chicago Cleaning. Personal cell. I don't care that it's 3 a.m. He waited. Made the call. His voice was cordial, businesslike, terrifying in its calmness. "Yes, this is Damon Castellano. I need the full employment file for." He glanced at the ID badge clipped to her uniform. "Imani Banks. Immediately. Address, emergency contacts, debt records, everything." He ended the call. Made another. "Marcus," Damon said, still watching the rise and fall of Imani's breathing. "Bring me something." "Yes, sir." "A ruler." Marcus returned 3 minutes later with a 12-inch stainless steel ruler from the drafting department. He held it out like an offering, his expression carefully neutral. Damon took it without a word, the metal cold even through his gloves. He turned it over in his hands, testing its weight, its rigidity. "Perfect. Should I stay, sir?" Marcus asked. "No. Wait outside. Make sure we're not interrupted." The security chief hesitated for only a fraction of a second before nodding and retreating to the hallway. The door clicked shut with a finality that seemed to echo in the silent office. Damon stood alone in his sanctuary with the sleeping intruder. He approached slowly, his eyes cataloging every violation. Her worn sneakers had left scuff marks on his desk's glass surface. The purple mop had dripped diluted cleaning solution onto his imported rug. Her cleaning cart sat askew, blocking his precisely arranged bookshelves. Even the air felt different, thick with the smell of industrial disinfectant and something else. Exhaustion. Human exhaustion. It made his skin crawl. He stopped 3 feet from the desk, maintaining distance, and really looked at her for the first time. Young. Mid-20s, maybe. Dark skin, long braids, a face that would have been pretty if it weren't so completely drained of life. Her uniform was faded, patched at the elbows. The kind of worn that came from washing the same clothes too many times because there was no money for replacements. She slept like someone who'd forgotten how to rest properly, one arm dangling off the chair, her head tilted at an angle that would leave her neck screaming when she woke. If she woke, she looked half dead already. Damon's jaw tightened. He didn't do pity. Pity was messy, uncontrollable, contaminated with emotion he couldn't sterilize. He lifted the ruler, brought it down hard against the glass desk. Crack. The sound shattered the silence like a gunshot. Imani jerked awake with a gasp, her body flailing as consciousness slammed into her. Her eyes flew open, wide, disoriented, terrified, and locked onto Damon standing over her like a dark judge at the end of the world. She tried to speak. Nothing came out but a strangled sound. Damon didn't move, didn't blink. He stood perfectly still, the ruler gripped in one gloved hand, his expression carved from ice. "You're in my chair," he said softly. Dangerously. Each word measured and precise. "You're in my office. You're in my space." Imani scrambled backward, nearly falling out of the chair in her panic. Her feet tangled in the mop handle. She grabbed the desk to steady herself, then yanked her hand back as if the surface burned. I'm sorry, I didn't mean, I was just—" "Do you know," Damon interrupted, his voice dropping even lower, "how much that chair costs?" She shook her head mutely, braids swinging. $35,000. He tapped the ruler against his palm. "Once. Twice. And you used it as a bed." 6 weeks earlier, Imani Banks sat in a beige hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and dying hope, listening to Dr. Patel destroy her world with clinical precision. "Stage 3 pancreatic cancer," the oncologist said, her voice kind but firm. "It's aggressive but operable. There's a specialist at Northwestern, Dr. Chun, who's had remarkable success with cases like your mother's." Imani's hand tightened around her mother's frail fingers. "What's the survival rate?" "With the surgery and treatment protocol? 65% chance of 5-year survival. Without it," Dr. Patel's pause said everything. 6 months. Maybe less. Mama Loretta squeezed back, her grip surprisingly strong for someone whose body was being eaten from the inside. "Baby, don't you worry about." "How much?" Imani cut her off, her eyes locked on the doctor. Dr. Patel slid a folder across the table. Imani opened it and felt her stomach drop through the floor. Total estimated cost: $280,000. Her mother's insurance, the bare minimum plan from the diner where she'd worked for 20 years, would cover half. Maybe. If they approved it. If every star aligned and God himself intervened. That left $140,000. Imani made $31,000 a year as a hospital receptionist. She did the math in 3 seconds and wanted to vomit. "There are payment plans," Dr. Patel offered gently. "Financial assistance programs. How long do we have to decide?" Imani's voice came out steady. She'd learned early that breaking down changed nothing. The surgery needs to happen within 8 weeks. After that, the tumor becomes inoperable. 8 weeks to find $140,000. Imani stopped sleeping that night. She picked up a second job within 48 hours. Waitressing at an all-night diner on the south side, slinging eggs and coffee to drunk college kids and third-shift workers. 4 hours of sleep became 3. Then 2. It wasn't enough. She found the third job 3 weeks later through a friend of a friend. Premium office cleaning for Gold Coast high-rises. The pay was better, $22 an hour instead of $15. But the shift ran from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m., which meant she worked hospital reception from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., served dinner plates from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m., then scrubbed executive toilets until dawn. Sleep became something she stole in 15-minute increments. In her car between shifts. In break rooms. Standing up against walls. Her hands developed permanent cracks from bleach. Her knees swelled from kneeling on marble floors. She lost 12 pounds in 3 weeks because eating took time she couldn't afford. But the bank account grew. Slowly. Painfully. $1,847. $3,290. $5,633. At this rate, she'd have the money in 4 years. Her mother had 8 weeks. So Imani stopped eating lunch. Stopped taking days off. Stopped existing as anything except a machine that converted hours into dollars, into hope, into survival. Which is how she ended up in Damon Castellano's office at 2:33 a.m., so exhausted she couldn't tell the difference between sitting and dying. And how he ended up standing over her with a ruler, about to change both their lives forever. The meeting with her cleaning supervisor happened at 6 a.m. in a Dunkin' Donuts parking lot. Because that's where you got fired when you fell asleep in a billionaire's $35,000 chair. Imani sat in her 12-year-old Honda, hands shaking around a coffee she couldn't afford, but bought anyway because her supervisor, Rita, insisted on buying her one. That felt ominous. Rita slid into the passenger seat, a woman in her 50s who'd seen every kind of cleaning disaster. She didn't look angry. She looked nervous. "You're not fired," Rita said immediately. Imani blinked. "What?" Mr. Castellano called the owner personally. At 3 a.m., Rita pulled out a folder thick enough to be a novel. "He wants to offer you a private contract." "A contract?" Imani's voice cracked. "I fell asleep in his office. I thought, read it first. Then decide if you want to run screaming." Rita handed over the folder and got out of the car before Imani could ask anything else. The contract was 23 pages long. Imani skimmed the first page and her heart stopped. Compensation: $140,000 paid in full upon successful completion of a 24-month service term as private household manager. Her hands started trembling so violently she almost dropped the paper. $140,000. The exact amount. To the dollar. He knew. Of course he knew. He'd demanded her employment file, her emergency contacts, her debt records. She kept reading, and with each page the dream turned darker. Residence requirement: live in. No overnight absences without written approval. Schedule: available 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. daily. 1 day off per month. Duties: all household management, meal preparation, inventory maintenance, guest coordination, personal assistance as required. Then came the standards section, and Imani's stomach turned. Meals prepared according to laminated dietary specifications. No deviations. All surfaces sanitized twice daily using approved products only. Pantry items organized alphabetically by category, labels facing forward, expiration dates monitored weekly. Clothing arranged by color gradient, hangers spaced exactly 2 inches apart. Guest towels replaced after single use. All linens hospital grade. Temperature maintained at exactly 68 degrees. Humidity at 45%. No fragrances. No candles. No plants. No pets. No personal items in common areas. The list went on for 4 pages. At the bottom of page 17 in smaller print. Termination clause. Any violation of household standards, protocols, or contamination procedures will result in immediate contract termination without compensation. Employee will be liable for all training costs and damages incurred. Imani read that line 3 times. She'd be living in a sterile cage with a man who'd threatened her with a ruler for sitting in his chair. If she made one mistake, organized the wrong shelf wrong, used the wrong cleaning product, breathed incorrectly, she'd lose everything and possibly owe him money. But her mother had 6 weeks left. And this was $140,000. Imani picked up her phone. Her hands had stopped shaking. When you were drowning, you didn't question the rope. You just grabbed it and prayed it wasn't a noose. She called the number listed at the bottom of the contract. Damon Castellano answered on the first ring. "I accept," Imani said. There was a pause. Then, "Be at my building by 6 p.m. Bring nothing scented. Nothing dirty. Nothing you." He hung up. Imani lasted exactly 47 minutes in Damon Castellano's penthouse before everything went catastrophically wrong. The apartment was less a home and more a museum to obsessive control. 16-foot ceilings. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. Furniture that looked like it had never been sat on because it probably hadn't. Everything white chrome glass. Surfaces so reflective Imani could see her own terrified face staring back from every angle. Damon stood in the kitchen. If you could call it that, it looked like a surgical suite. Wearing a fresh pair of latex gloves and holding a laminated binder the size of a phone book. "This is your operational manual," he said without preamble. "Meal schedules, cleaning protocols, inventory systems. You'll memorize it within 72 hours. Imani took the binder. It weighed at least 5 pounds. "Your quarters are down that hall. Last door. You have 20 minutes to change into the provided uniforms and return for orientation." His dark eyes fixed on her like a scientist observing bacteria. "Do not touch anything you haven't been instructed to touch. Do not open any drawers or cabinets without permission. Do not." His phone rang. Damon pulled it from his pocket. Some sleek custom model Imani had never seen before, and answered with clinical efficiency. "Castellano." He turned away, phone pressed to his ear, his attention shifting to whatever crisis required his immediate intervention. Imani stood there awkwardly, still holding the massive binder, unsure if she was dismissed or supposed to wait. She shifted her weight, and the binder started to slip from her tired arms. She fumbled to catch it. It slipped anyway, hit the marble floor with a thunderous crack. Damon spun around, his expression flashing to fury. And Imani, acting on pure panic and instinct, reached out to apologize, to explain, her hand outstretched in a gesture of desperate placation. Her fingers brushed his wrist, skin to skin, just above where his glove ended. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. A sensation like touching a live wire shot through both of them. An actual physical shock that made Imani gasp and Damon jerk backward as if she'd burned him. His phone flew from his hand, arcing through the air in what felt like slow motion. It hit the marble floor. The custom case shattered. The screen spiderwebbed into 1,000 glittering fragments. The sleek device skidded across the floor and came to rest against the stainless steel refrigerator, clearly and completely destroyed. Silence crashed down like a guillotine. Imani stared at the phone, then at her hand, then at Damon. Damon stared at his wrist where she'd touched him, his breathing rapid and shallow, his face drained of all color. His fingers trembled as he yanked his sleeve down to cover the contact point. "What?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Did you just do?" I didn't mean, it was an accident." "That phone," Damon interrupted, his eyes still locked on his covered wrist, "is custom-built. Encrypted. Irreplaceable." He finally looked up at her, and Imani saw something she hadn't expected. Not anger. Fear. $80,000, he said quietly. "You just cost me $80,000. Imani felt the floor drop out from under her. I'll pay you back." "How?" Damon's laugh was hollow. "You're already in debt to me for $140,000. Now it's $220,000. He took a step toward her, and she saw his hands were shaking. "Congratulations, Miss Banks. Your contract just became 4 years instead of 2. 3 days into her 4-year sentence, Imani learned that hell wasn't fire and brimstone. It was alphabetized spice racks and laminated meal cards. She stood in Damon's kitchen at 6:47 a.m., staring at Wednesday's breakfast requirements like they were written in a foreign language. Omelette. 3 eggs, organic, cage-free, stored at 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Gruyere cheese, shredded not sliced. Chives fresh, chopped to 3 mm pieces. Cooked to 165 degrees Fahrenheit internal temperature. Plated on warm dish. Served at exactly 7 a.m. 13 minutes. Imani had made 1,000 omelettes in her life. This shouldn't be difficult. But Damon's kitchen wasn't a kitchen. It was a laboratory. Every ingredient had its designated location. The eggs sat in a temperature-controlled drawer, each one dated with a label maker. The cheese lived in a specific section of the refrigerator, pre-portioned into exact measurements in sealed containers. The chives grew in a hydroponic herb garden by the window, each plant trimmed to uniform height. She found the cutting board, one of 12, each designated for different food categories and marked with laser-etched labels. Located the knife block, where every blade sat in order of size, handles aligned. Retrieved the omelet pan from its assigned hook. Cooking became geometry. She cracked the eggs. Whisked them exactly 20 times as specified. Heated the pan to medium. Checked with an infrared thermometer, because of course there was an infrared thermometer. Poured. Waited. Added cheese and chives at the precise moment the edges set. The omelet folded perfectly. She plated it on a dish she'd warmed to exactly 120 degrees Fahrenheit, wiped the edges clean, and placed it on the dining table at 6:59 a.m. Damon appeared at exactly 7 o'clock, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her car, his hair slicked back with mathematical precision. He sat without acknowledging her presence. Cut into the omelet with a knife and fork that he'd already sanitized himself despite Imani washing them 3 times. He took one bite. Chewed. Swallowed. Set down his fork. "Adequate," he said. That was it. 1 word. He continued eating in mechanical silence, each bite timed, each movement controlled. When he finished, he stood, checked his watch, and walked toward the door. "The pantry reorganization wasn't completed yesterday," he said without turning around. "You placed the balsamic vinegar before the apple cider vinegar. Alphabetical order, Miss Banks. Not by bottle size. Not by frequency of use. Alphabetical." The door closed behind him. Imani stood in the pristine kitchen, surrounded by temperature-controlled drawers and color-coded cutting boards and laminated instruction cards for every meal, every task, every breath. Adequate. She'd worked for 40 minutes to produce that omelet. Had followed every instruction to the letter. Had measured and timed and temperature-checked until her hands cramped. Adequate. For years of this. For years of living in a sterile cage where emotions didn't exist and approval was a single cold word delivered without eye contact. For years of being not a person but a function, another appliance in Damon Castellano's perfectly controlled machine. Imani walked to the pantry and stared at the vinegar bottles. She'd alphabetized them wrong by one bottle. One bottle. And he'd noticed. She moved the balsamic vinegar to its correct position and wondered if you could die from being adequate. It happened on day 9, at 9:47 p.m., while Imani was sanitizing the kitchen counters for the second time that day. She heard his footsteps before she saw him, measured, controlled, the sound of a man who'd calculated every step before taking it. Damon appeared in the kitchen doorway still wearing his work clothes, though he'd removed his jacket. His tie was loosened. For him, that was practically undressed. Imani froze, spray bottle in hand. He never came into rooms she was cleaning. He waited until she finished, then entered like he was reclaiming sterilized territory. "Miss Banks." His voice was tight, strained. "I need you to do something." She set down the bottle carefully. "Yes, sir?" He stood there for a long moment, his jaw working like he was chewing words he didn't want to say. His hands opened and closed at his sides. Finally, he pulled off his right glove with sharp, agitated movements. "The day you arrived, when you touched my wrist." He wouldn't look at her. "I need you to do it again." Imani blinked. "I what?" "Touch me. Skin to skin. I need to verify something." Every instinct screamed at her to refuse. This was the man who sanitized door handles, who wore gloves to shake hands, who'd once stopped breathing when she'd accidentally brushed past him in the hallway. "Mr. Castellano, I don't think. I'm not asking for your analysis." His eyes finally met hers, and what she saw there wasn't anger. It was something raw, desperate. "I'm asking you to touch my hand for 5 seconds. That's all." Imani's heart hammered against her ribs. "Why?" He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Then, because you're the first person in 17 years who hasn't made my skin crawl." The words hung in the pristine kitchen like a confession. "When you touched me," he continued, his voice dropping lower, "I felt the shock, the electricity. But underneath it," he stopped, started again. "I didn't feel contaminated. I didn't feel the need to scrub my skin raw. I felt." He couldn't finish. Imani understood anyway. She'd seen him after meetings, after shaking hands with clients. The way he'd disappear into the bathroom for 20 minutes, emerging with reddened skin and that hollow look in his eyes. She'd seen the scars on his knuckles from excessive washing. The way he flinched when people got too close. She'd thought he was disgusted by her. But maybe it wasn't disgust at all. Maybe it was hope, and hope was more terrifying. "Okay," she said quietly. Damon's exhale was shaky. He extended his bare hand, palm up, like an offering. Or a surrender. Imani wiped her hands on her uniform, a nervous gesture, and stepped forward. Raised her hand. Hesitated. "It's fine," he said, though his whole body was rigid with tension. She pressed her palm against his. The electricity hit immediately. That same live wire sensation that had sent his phone flying. But this time they were ready for it. This time they didn't pull away. Damon's fingers closed around hers. And something in his expression cracked open. "You're not burning me," he whispered. Almost reverent. Almost broken. "You're not contaminating me." "No," Imani said softly. "I'm not." They stood there in the sterile kitchen, hands clasped, while the city lights glittered through the windows, and something neither of them understood hummed between their touching skin. For the first time in 9 days, Damon looked at her like she might be human. And for the first time in 17 years, he didn't feel alone in his own body. The episode happened 6 weeks into Imani's contract, triggered by something as simple as burnt toast. She'd been making breakfast, Thursday's requirements, whole grain toast with almond butter, when the toaster malfunctioned. Smoke curled upward in thin gray wisps. The smell hit the air, charred bread, bitter and acrid. Imani yanked the plug from the wall and waved a towel to disperse the smoke before the alarm could trigger. She didn't hear Damon enter the kitchen behind her. Didn't see him freeze in the doorway, his briefcase falling from nerveless fingers and hitting the marble with a crack that sounded like breaking bones. She turned around and found him paralyzed, his face drained of all color, eyes locked on the smoke dissipating near the ceiling. His chest heaved with rapid, shallow breaths. His hands trembled violently at his sides. "Mr. Castellano?" Imani dropped the towel. "Are you? Get out." His voice was barely a whisper. "What? Get out." The roar tore from his throat, primal and terrified. Get out, get out, get out. He collapsed. Not fell, collapsed. Like a building with its supports cut. His knees hit the floor hard enough to bruise. His hands clawed at his throat, his tie, trying to breathe through a windpipe that had stopped working. Imani ran to him, every protocol forgotten. Damon. Damon, look at me. Can't breathe, smoke, they're still inside. His words came in gasping fragments. Have to get them out, Dad, Lily, the door's locked. There's no fire, Imani said firmly, grabbing his face between her hands. The electricity sparked, but she didn't let go. Damon, there's no fire. It was just toast. You're in your kitchen. You're safe. But he wasn't seeing her. His eyes stared through her at something 17 years gone. I locked it, he choked out. The door. I locked it from outside because I was angry. 9 years old and angry because Dad yelled at me for. He couldn't finish. His whole body shook. Went to my treehouse. Saw the smoke. By the time I got back, his voice shattered completely. The door was locked. I locked it. Lily was screaming from her bedroom window. Dad was trying to break through. I couldn't. The key was in my pocket, and my hands wouldn't work, and they were burning. Imani pulled him against her chest, her arms wrapping around his shaking frame. She felt him stiffen. He never allowed contact, never. But then something broke in him, and he stopped fighting. It wasn't your fault, she whispered into his hair. You were a child. I killed them. His voice was muffled against her shoulder, raw with 17 years of guilt. 9 years old, and I killed my father and my sister because I was angry about a bad grade. Because I wanted to punish him. You were 9. I could smell them burning. Imani held him tighter, this broken man in his $1,000 suit, kneeling on his pristine kitchen floor while the ghost of smoke from burnt toast dragged him back to the worst moment of his life. Every time something burns, Damon whispered, I'm 9 years old again. Standing outside that locked door. Holding the key. Watching them die. The call came at 2:34 a.m. on a Tuesday, 3 months into Imani's contract. Her mother was awake. Imani stood in the hallway outside Northwestern Memorial's ICU, phone pressed to her ear, tears streaming down her face as the night nurse explained that Mama Loretta had opened her eyes an hour ago, asked for water, and demanded to see her daughter. The surgery had worked. She was going to live. Imani didn't remember the cab ride to the hospital. Didn't remember running through the corridors. Only remembered bursting into the recovery room and seeing her mother's eyes, tired but alive, tracking her movement. Baby girl, Mama Loretta rasped, her voice scratchy from the breathing tube. Imani collapsed into the chair beside the bed, gripping her mother's hand like a lifeline. They cried together until a nurse gently reminded them that rest was critical for recovery. Imani stayed anyway, curled in the uncomfortable chair, watching her mother breathe. She didn't hear the door open at 6:15 a.m. Didn't see Damon Castellano enter carrying a briefcase, dressed in his usual armor of expensive suits and emotional distance. But Mama Loretta saw him. You, she said, her voice weak but sharp, must be the man who owns my daughter. Imani's head snapped up. Mama, don't mama me. Loretta's eyes stayed fixed on Damon. Sit down. Damon hesitated. He wasn't used to being commanded. But something in this dying woman's voice, no, this living woman's voice, made him obey. He sat in the chair opposite Imani, back straight, hands folded. My baby told me about your contract, Loretta continued. Told me you're paying for this surgery. That she works for you now. She paused, gathering strength. What she didn't tell me was how she ended up working for you. Imani's stomach dropped. Mama, it's not. She fell asleep in your office, Loretta said, still looking at Damon. Exhausted from working 3 jobs to save my life. And you saw a desperate woman and you. What? Decided to buy her? It's not like that, Imani interjected desperately. He's helping. Is it a fair contract? Loretta asked Damon directly. Would you sign it yourself? Silence filled the sterile hospital room. Damon's jaw worked. His hands tightened in his lap. Finally, he said, No. Then why? Loretta asked, her voice breaking. Should my daughter? Because I needed the money, Imani said. Because you needed. I needed my daughter to have a life, Loretta interrupted, tears rolling down her weathered cheeks. Not to sell herself into servitude for mine. She looked at Damon. You want to help? Really help? Then let her go. Mama, no. The debt is paid, Loretta said firmly. The surgery's done. Whatever she owes you, consider it settled. Damon sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable. Then he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. Imani recognized it immediately, her contract. 23 pages of her life signed away. He set it on the bed between them. "Tear it up," Loretta said. "Mama, please." Imani was crying now. "The phone, the $80,000. I still owe." "Tear it up," Loretta repeated, eyes locked on Damon. "Or leave my room and never come near my daughter again." Damon stared at the contract for a long moment. Then slowly he picked it up and tore it in half. Imani moved out of the penthouse that same day. Damon arranged for her mother to be transferred to a private recovery suite, paid in full, no strings attached. He had Imani's belongings packed and delivered to a modest but clean apartment in Logan Square. The rent was covered for 6 months. After that, she was on her own. He didn't say goodbye. For 2 weeks, Imani threw herself into caring for her mother. Mama Loretta grew stronger daily, eating solid foods, walking the hallways, laughing at terrible daytime television. The doctors called it a miracle. Imani called it borrowed time she'd never take for granted. But at night, alone in her new apartment, she pressed her palm against the wall and remembered what it felt like to touch someone who didn't make her feel small. She wondered if he remembered too. The knock came on a Thursday evening, 17 days after she'd left. Imani opened the door and found Damon standing in her hallway, looking more disheveled than she'd ever seen him. His tie was crooked. His hair had fallen slightly out of place. He wore gloves, but they were wrinkled like he'd been clenching his fists. "I can't stop thinking about it," he said without preamble. "The electricity. The fact that you don't," he stopped. "Started again. I need to know if it was real. If it only worked because you were trapped. Because you had to touch me." Imani's heart hammered. "You want to test it? I want to know if the antidote still works," he said quietly. "When you have a choice." She should have closed the door. Should have protected herself from a man who'd coerced her into servitude, who'd held her debt over her head like a weapon. But she remembered him breaking down on the kitchen floor. Remembered the way his voice cracked when he talked about his sister's screams. Remembered that underneath all the control and sterility was just a 9-year-old boy who'd been carrying corpses in his head for 17 years. She stepped aside. "Come in." Damon entered her small apartment like he was walking into a minefield. His eyes cataloged everything. The second-hand furniture, the dishes in the sink, the lived-in chaos he'd never allowed in his own space. He didn't comment. Just stood in the center of her living room, waiting. Imani walked to him slowly. "If we do this," she said, "it's because we choose to. Not because of money. Not because of contracts. Not because of debt. I know. Do you?" She searched his face. "Because I need you to understand. I'm not your employee anymore. I'm not your property. I'm not something you can control." "I know," Damon repeated, and this time his voice cracked. "That's what terrifies me." Imani understood. Control was how he survived. How he kept the ghosts at bay. And she was asking him to let it go. She removed his gloves slowly, one finger at a time. He trembled but didn't pull away. Then she took his hands in hers. The electricity flared between them. Stronger this time, because nothing was forcing them together except the terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, they could be each other's antidote. Damon's eyes closed. "It's still there." "Yes. You're still not contaminating me." "No." He opened his eyes, and she saw tears threatening to fall. "I don't know how to do this without contracts and rules and control." "Neither do I," Imani admitted. "But we can figure it out. Together." Damon pulled her closer, hesitant, asking permission with his eyes. She nodded. He kissed her like a man who'd forgotten how to breathe and just remembered. The call to his mother happened on a Saturday morning, 6 months after that first kiss in Imani's apartment. Damon sat on the couch, Imani's second-hand couch that he'd learned to sit on without sanitizing first, with his phone in his ungloved hands. He'd been staring at the contact labeled Catherine Castellano for 20 minutes. Imani emerged from the kitchen with 2 cups of coffee. She set one beside him and sat close enough that their shoulders touched. The electricity hummed between them, gentle now. "Familiar. You don't have to do this today," she said softly. "Yes, I do." Damon's thumb hovered over the call button. "My therapist says I'm ready." "You say I'm ready." He looked at her. "Am I ready?" "Only you can answer that." He'd been in therapy for 5 months now. Twice-a-week sessions where Dr. Morrison patiently dismantled 17 years of guilt and helped him understand that 9-year-old boys don't commit murder when they lock doors in anger. That trauma responses aren't moral failures. That control is sometimes just fear wearing an expensive suit. It was brutal work. Some days Damon wanted to quit. But Imani would hold his hand and remind him that antidotes only worked if you kept taking them. He pressed the call. His mother answered on the third ring. Damon, her voice, he hadn't heard it in 12 years. Not since she'd looked at him across the funeral reception and said, I can't look at you without seeing them burning. Hello, mother. His voice shook. Imani squeezed his hand. I didn't think you'd ever call. Neither did I. Damon closed his eyes. I need to tell you something. About the fire. About what happened. Damon, we don't have to. Yes, we do. He took a breath. I was 9. I locked the door because I was angry. But I didn't kill them. The electrical fire in the basement killed them. The faulty wiring you and Dad had been meaning to fix for months killed them. I couldn't save them fast enough. Silence stretched across the line. Then his mother's voice broken. I know. Damon's eyes snapped open. What? The fire inspector told me. Told me about the wiring. Told me it was an accident. Catherine's breath hitched. I blamed you anyway. Because blaming a child was easier than blaming myself for ignoring the warning signs. For not fixing the wiring. For failing to protect them. Tears rolled down Damon's face. Imani wrapped her arms around him. I'm sorry, Catherine whispered. I'm so sorry, baby. I abandoned you when you needed me most. I abandoned myself too, Damon said. But I'm trying to find my way back. They talked for an hour. Cried together across phone lines. Made plans to meet for coffee. Small steps toward forgiveness that felt monumental. When Damon finally hung up, he turned to Imani and said, I want to do something. What? Your mother's apartment. It's too small. Too many stairs for her recovery. He pulled out his phone again. I want to buy her a house. A real one. With a yard. Close to good hospitals. Damon, you don't have to. I want to, he interrupted. Not as payment. Not as control. As family. He looked at her with those dark eyes that had learned how to be soft. Because that's what we're building, isn't it? A family. The kind that doesn't burn down. Imani kissed him, tasting salt and hope. Yeah, she whispered against his lips. That's exactly what we're building. 3 months later, Mama Loretta moved into a ranch-style home in Oak Park with accessible features and a garden she'd always dreamed of tending. Catherine Castellano came to the housewarming. The two mothers bonded over coffee and stories of their stubborn children. Damon stood in the backyard with Imani, watching them laugh through the kitchen window. I used to think control meant perfection, he said quietly. And now, Imani laced her fingers through his. Now I think it means choosing growth. Even when it's messy. He turned to her. Especially when it's messy. The electricity sparked between them. Not a shock anymore, but a steady current. A connection that didn't need contracts or rules or sterile cages. Just two people who'd learned that sometimes the antidote to isolation is simply letting someone see you burn and choosing to rebuild anyway. Together.